There's a stretch of water on this planet barely 20 miles wide. At its narrowest, the shipping lanes squeeze down to just 2 miles across in each direction. You could swim it in an afternoon if the currents let you. And that thin sliver of sea quietly decides what you pay for gasoline, what your groceries cost, whether the economy of the entire world has a good year or a terrible one. It's called the Strait of Hormuz. Most people have never heard its name. And yet roughly a fifth of all the oil humanity burns and a fifth of all its natural gas has no choice but to pass through it. Single file, like cars through a toll booth. Here's the part that should stop you cold. One country sits right on top of it. And every few decades, when that country feels cornered, it reaches for the same terrifying threat. Close the strait and choke the planet. So the real question isn't really about any one war or any one leader or any one headline. The real question is bigger and older, and it'll still be true long after today's news is forgotten. How did the modern world come to balance its entire economy on a stretch of water this small? Why can't we route around it? And what actually happens to you, to your wallet, the day it closes? Stay with me, because once you see how this works, you'll never read the news the same way again. Let me show you the map in your mind, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Picture the Persian Gulf. It's almost a closed room, a big bathtub of seawater tucked between the Arabian Peninsula on one side and Iran on the other. And around the rim of that bathtub sit some of the richest oil and gas fields ever discovered. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran itself. Trillions of dollars of energy sitting in the ground around one enclosed body of water. Now here's the problem. That bathtub has only one drain, one way out to the open ocean. And that drain is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow elbow of water where the Arabian Peninsula very nearly touches Iran, leaving a gap barely 20 miles wide, and only a couple of usable shipping lanes within it. So every supertanker leaving the Gulf, loaded with the oil that runs Tokyo and Frankfurt and Los Angeles, has to thread that needle. There is no other door. The oil can't walk overland. It can't fly. It rides on ships, and the ships have exactly one way out. This is what geographers and strategists call a choke point, and it's worth understanding the idea itself, because it explains so much more than this one waterway. A choke point is any narrow passage that an enormous amount of the world's trade is forced to squeeze through. The Panama Canal is one. The Suez Canal is another. The Strait of Malacca over by Singapore is a third. There are only a handful of these on the entire planet, and a frightening share of everything humanity buys and sells flows through them. Think of it like the plumbing of a great city. You turn on your tap and clean water comes out, and you never think about it. But all of that water runs through a few critical pipes and a few critical valves buried under the streets. The system works beautifully, right up until somebody puts their hand on one of those valves. And Hormuz is the single most important valve in the world's energy plumbing. Here's why it matters so much, in plain numbers that don't change much from year to year. Roughly 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil consumed on Earth passes through that strait. About a fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas, the fuel that heats homes and powers factories across Asia and Europe, goes through it too. On a normal day, something like 20 million barrels of oil thread that needle. There is no comparable passage anywhere with that much of the world's lifeblood running through it. And here's the cruel twist of geography. For most of the countries on that bathtub's rim, there is no plan B. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have managed to build a couple of pipelines that can carry some of their oil overland out to the Red Sea, bypassing the strait. Some, not most, for Iraq, for Kuwait, for Qatar's enormous gas exports. For the bulk of everyone's production, there is no overland escape. The strait is the only way, which means whoever can threaten the strait holds a knife to the throat of a fifth of the world's energy. Now, sit with the strangeness of that for a moment. We tend to imagine the modern global economy as this vast, sophisticated, almost weightless thing. Data flying through the air, money moving at the speed of light, trillions of dollars changing hands with a tap. And we assume something that big, that advanced, must also be sturdy, resilient, too complex to break. But it isn't. Underneath all of it, underneath the apps and the markets and the gleaming towers, the whole structure still rests on physical stuff moving through physical space. Oil in steel hulls, gas in pressurized tanks, ships crawling across the water at the speed of a bicycle, threading a gap 20 miles wide. The most advanced economy in human history still depends, at its very foundation, on a tanker getting safely through a narrow channel that one nation can reach out and touch. This is the thing I most want you to take from this whole video, because it's true far beyond Hormuz. We have built a civilization that feels invincible and is actually balanced on a handful of slender threads. A few waterways, a few pipelines, a few cables on the ocean floor. We've spent decades making everything more connected, more efficient, more just in time. And we told ourselves that all this connection made us safer, stronger, too entangled to ever truly break down. The opposite is true. All that connection didn't make us safer. It made us exposed. Every efficiency we added was one more thread pulled tight. And a thing pulled tight is a thing that can snap. We didn't build a fortress. We built a spider's web. Beautiful, vast, humming with activity. And we forgot the oldest rule of webs. Anything caught inside one can also make the whole thing tremble. The Strait of Hormuz is the place where that truth becomes visible, where the abstract, weightless global economy suddenly has a body and a soft spot. And once a nation figures out exactly where that soft spot is, the temptation to press on, it becomes almost irresistible. Which raises the question that runs through every crisis this waterway has ever seen. What happens the day somebody finally decides to squeeze? So let's answer it. What does it actually take to choke the most important waterway on Earth? You might assume the answer is a great navy. Battleships, aircraft carriers, the kind of power it takes to rule the seas. And you'd be wrong. That's the thing that makes a choke point so dangerous and so different from an ordinary battlefield. You don't need to win the sea. You only need to make it terrifying. Here's the logic, and it's worth slowing down for. Because it's the engine underneath every Hormuz crisis in history. To keep that strait open, the world needs ordinary commercial ships, supertankers, container ships, gas carriers, to feel safe enough to sail through it. These are not warships. They're slow, enormous, unarmed, and they carry crews of ordinary sailors and cargo worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They are floating, fragile, and utterly defenseless. And the thing about defending a ship like that is, you can't, really. Not fully. So the people who insure those ships, the ones who actually decide whether a tanker sails or stays in port, they don't ask, will this ship probably make it? They ask, what's the chance it doesn't? And the moment that chance climbs even a little, two things happen. Insurance costs explode, and captains simply refuse to go. That's the secret. You don't have to sink the fleet. You just have to make the fleet afraid. And making a fleet afraid is astonishingly cheap. Consider the tools. Naval mines, some of them designs that are nearly a century old, can be dropped quietly into the water from a small fishing boat in the dark. They cost very little. They're hard to find. And a single one can cripple a ship worth a fortune. Then there are the small, fast attack boats, little more than speedboats with weapons bolted on, that can dart out from 100 hidden coves along a jagged coastline. And in our era, add cheap drones and missiles that a determined country can build by the thousand for a few $1,000s each. Now look at the other side of that equation. The warships that protect commercial traffic and the interceptor missiles they fire to shoot down an incoming threat can cost millions of dollars apiece. So you get this brutal, lopsided arithmetic that defines the whole problem. One side spends a few $1,000s to create terror. The other side spends millions to hold it back. And the side spending thousands has thousands to spend. It's the oldest trap in the history of conflict, just wearing modern clothes. Picture a man throwing rocks at a castle made of gold. He can't take the castle. He knows that. Everyone knows that. But every rock he throws forces the king to spend a fortune deflecting it. So he just keeps throwing. He doesn't need to win. He only needs to make defending the walls cost more than the king can bear. That asymmetry, cheap attack, expensive defense, is exactly why a relatively weak country, sitting on the right piece of geography, can hold a far stronger world economy hostage. And this is the part most people never realize. Nobody even has to fire a shot to do real damage. The threat alone is often enough. The mere credible promise that ships might be attacked sends insurance rates soaring and convinces captains to drop anchor and wait. The strait can effectively close while the water itself stays perfectly calm. Fear does the work that bombs would otherwise have to. Fear is the cheapest weapon ever invented, and at a choke point, it's the most powerful. There's a deeper human truth hiding in here, and it's worth pausing on. We tend to think power comes from strength, from having the most, the biggest, the heaviest. But sometimes the most leverage belongs to whoever has the least to lose and sits in exactly the right spot. The cornered, the desperate, the one with his back to the wall. Give him the right piece of ground, and he can make the mighty tremble. History is full of this lesson, and people in power forget it again and again, usually right before they learn it the hard way. Now, and this is crucial, being able to close a choke point and actually wanting to are two very different things. Because here's the catch that has held the Strait of Hormuz open through crisis after crisis for decades. The country best positioned to close it depends on it too. Its own oil, the money that funds its government, feeds its people, keeps its whole system alive, has to sail out through that very same gap. Slam the door on the world, and you slam it on yourself. You burn down the neighbor's house, but your house shares a wall. So closing the strait has always been the ultimate threat, precisely because it's so close to suicidal. It's the move you reach for only when you feel you've already lost everything. When the pain you can inflict on the world finally seems worth the pain you'll inflict on yourself. It's not a first move. It's a last one. A doomsday lever you keep your hand near, hoping the world stays scared enough that you never actually have to pull it. For decades, that grim logic kept the strait open, even in the worst of times. The threat was always there, always looming, but the self-destruction it required kept it holstered. The trouble is that logic only holds as long as the country with its hand on the lever still has something left to lose. And that's exactly the condition that, every so often, stops being true. To see what happens then, we have to go back. Back to the last time this exact trap snapped shut on the world. To understand what's happening at Hormuz in our own time, you have to go back about 40 years to a conflict most Americans have completely forgotten, even though it was the largest naval operation the United States had run since the Second World War. In the 1980s, Iran and Iraq fought a long, grinding, brutal war. 8 years of it. And when the fighting on land ground into a bloody stalemate, both sides looked for another way to strangle each other. They found it on the water. If you can't beat your enemy's army, the thinking went, beat his economy. And both of these countries lived and died on one thing: selling oil through the Persian Gulf. So they started attacking ships. Iraq went after Iran's tankers and its oil terminals. Iran struck back at ships carrying oil for Iraq and for the Gulf states bankrolling Iraq's war. This became known as the Tanker War. And over the course of it, hundreds of vessels were hit, set ablaze, mined, raked with machine gun fire. The captain of one tanker described inspecting missile damage to the deck of the very ship he was piloting through the strait. It was the choke point nightmare, live and in color. And here's where it gets interesting, where the deep lesson lives. Iran threatened again and again to close the Strait of Hormuz entirely, to slam the door on everyone. And the whole world held its breath because everyone understood what that would mean. But Iran never actually did it. Not fully. Why? For exactly the reason we just talked about. Iran's own economy was already crippled by the war, and it depended on those same sea lanes to export its own oil and keep itself alive. Closing the strait would have been a blade pressed as hard against its own throat as against anyone else's. So it held back. It made the threat. But it kept the threat holstered because it still had something left to lose. The other lesson of the tanker war is about who shows up when a choke point gets squeezed. When Iranian mines and attacks started threatening Kuwait's tankers, Kuwait went looking for a great power to protect its ships. And here's a detail that tells you everything about how this game works. Both superpowers came running. The Soviet Union offered to escort the ships first, and the United States, under President Reagan, was not about to let Moscow look like the guardian of the world's oil. So Washington launched Operation Earnest Will, reflagging Kuwaiti tankers under the American flag, so the U.S. Navy could legally escort them through the Gulf. It became the biggest naval convoy operation since World War II. Think about what that reveals. A choke point doesn't just threaten the countries nearby. It pulls in the most powerful nations on Earth, almost against their will, because none of them can afford to let the world's energy supply fall under a rival's control or be choked off entirely. The strait acts like a kind of gravity well. Trouble there bends the whole world toward it. The mighty don't get dragged in because they want to be. They get dragged in because they cannot afford not to be. And it was dangerous, the way these things always are. A reflagged tanker struck a mine on the very first convoy. An American warship was nearly crippled by another. And then came the tragedy that still echoes. In the tense, jumpy fog of war chaos of those waters, a U.S. Navy ship mistook an Iranian civilian airliner for an attacking warplane and shot it down. Nearly 300 people died, none of them soldiers. That horror, more than any battle, helped push an exhausted Iran toward finally ending the war. I tell you all of this not as a history lesson for its own sake, but because it lays bare the pattern, the machine that runs underneath every Hormuz crisis, then and now. A weaker power, cornered, reaches for the choke point as its great equalizer. The threat alone sends shockwaves through the global economy. The great powers get sucked in because the stakes are simply too high to ignore. The narrow, crowded, jumpy waters breed accidents and tragedies that nobody intended and nobody can fully control. And underneath it all sits that one restraining force. That the country with its hand on the lever depends on the strait too, and so, in the end, holds back. Which brings us to the most unsettling question of all. The question that turns this from history into something urgent. What happens when that last restraint finally falls away? What happens when the country sitting on the choke point becomes so cornered, so broke, so close to collapse, that it no longer feels it has anything left to lose? When the blade against its own throat stops mattering, because it believes it's dying anyway? That's the line nobody can be sure of in advance. For decades, the math of self-destruction kept the door open. But the math only works while there's still a future worth protecting. Take that away, and the doomsday lever stops being unthinkable. It starts looking, to a desperate regime, almost reasonable. And that is exactly the situation the world keeps stumbling back toward at Hormuz. The strait has been threatened over and over across the decades. During the tanker war, during later standoffs, during sanctions crises, and in the conflict gripping the region right now. Each time, the world holds its breath. Each time we relearn the same lesson we somehow keep forgetting, that the entire modern economy rests on the self-restraint of whoever happens to be cornered at that particular moment. It's a terrifying thing to build a civilization on. And yet here we are, still building on it, every single day. Now let's bring this all the way home. To your driveway, your grocery cart, your kitchen table. Because the part of this story that feels abstract on a map becomes very, very concrete the day a choke point actually closes. Let's walk through exactly how the squeeze travels from a stretch of water on the far side of the planet into your own household budget. Because this chain is the same every single time, whether it happened in the 1980s or it's happening right now. It starts with fear, not fire. The moment that strait becomes dangerous, the insurance companies move first. They look at the risk and they jack up the cost of insuring a tanker that sails through, sometimes several times over, almost overnight. And for a lot of ship owners, the math simply stops working. So the ships stop sailing. They drop anchor and wait. And just like that, the world's single most important oil artery slows to a trickle, without a single shot necessarily being fired. Now the oil that the world was counting on doesn't show up. And here's the iron law of oil that never changes. When supply falls and demand stays the same, the price goes up, not gently, like a rocket. In a serious Hormuz disruption, the global benchmark price of crude can leap by tens of dollars a barrel in a matter of days. We've watched it blow past 100, past 120. Here's where it touches you. About half of what you pay for a gallon of gasoline is just the cost of the crude oil itself. So when oil prices double, the price at your pump follows it up the hill. A country can go from paying around $3 a gallon to well over $4, even $5, in a matter of weeks. That's not a forecast. That's the documented pattern, again and again. But gasoline is only the first domino, and honestly, not even the worst one, because the same shock hits diesel and jet fuel just as hard. And now think about what runs on diesel. Trucks, trains, cargo ships, the entire circulatory system that carries physical goods to you. Almost everything in your home, the food in your fridge, the medicine in your cabinet, the furniture you're sitting on, arrived on something that burns diesel. So when diesel spikes, the cost of moving everything spikes with it. And that quietly lands on the price of bread, of milk, of the cereal your grandkids eat for breakfast. This is the part people miss. They think an oil shock means gas is expensive for a while. But it doesn't stay at the pump. It seeps into the price of nearly everything, because nearly everything has to be moved. And moving things runs on fuel. That broad, grinding rise in the cost of living has a name: inflation. And a big enough energy shock is one of the most reliable ways to set it off across an entire economy at once. And it doesn't stop at your country's borders, because this is one connected system. When a Hormuz crisis hits, you see fuel shortages and lines around the block in places like Thailand and Pakistan and Bangladesh. You see panic buying. You see European households watching their heating bills double. You see factories in Asia, the ones that make the goods stocking shelves all over the world, forced to slow down because energy suddenly costs too much. From an American family at the pump, to a Chinese factory floor, to a European living room in winter, billions of people feel the same squeeze at roughly the same moment, all because of a narrow channel most of them couldn't find on a map. And then there's the irony that ought to make every thinking person stop. Who profits when a choke point closes and the world's oil gets scarce? Not the people doing the squeezing, usually. The winners are the other oil producers, the ones safely outside the choke point, who can keep selling into a panicked market at sky-high prices. So a crisis meant to punish one country can end up fattening the wallets of others, sometimes the very rivals you were hoping to weaken elsewhere. That's the tangled world we live in. Pull one thread, and three others move in directions nobody intended. Now here's the cruelest detail of all, and it's the one that matters most for your life. Even when the crisis ends, even when the strait reopens and the ships finally start sailing again, the prices do not just snap back to where they were. They don't fall the way they rose. There's an old line among oil traders: prices go up like a rocket and come down like a feather. Clearing the danger out of the water takes time. Rebuilding the confidence of ship captains and insurers takes longer. The producers who shut down their wells can't just flip them back on like a light switch. And so, even in the best case, it can take many months, sometimes more than a year, for what you pay to drift back down to where it started. So when a politician stands at a podium and promises that prices will fall rapidly the moment the trouble ends, now you know better. Now you understand the machinery underneath. The damage doesn't reverse when the shooting stops. It lingers. It always lingers. Because a choke point crisis isn't a switch. It's a wound. And wounds heal slowly. That's the journey. From fear on a faraway sea to the insurance desk, to the price of crude, to your gas tank, to your grocery receipt, to the overall cost of your life. And a slow, grudging recovery long after the headlines have moved on. That's how a stretch of water 20 miles wide reaches all the way into your kitchen without ever firing a shot anywhere near you. By now, there's a perfectly reasonable question burning in your mind. The same one that occurs to every sensible person who learns about this. If a single narrow waterway is this dangerous, if it can hold the whole world hostage, then why on earth haven't we fixed it? We can put machines on Mars. We can move money around the planet in a millisecond. Why are we still hostage to a 20-mile gap in the sea? It's a great question. And the answers are humbling, because they teach you something about the limits of even the mightiest power. Start with the most obvious fix. Just build a way around it. Pipelines. If the oil can't safely sail out through the strait, run it overland in a pipe to a coast on the other side and load it onto ships there, far from danger. And to a degree, this has been tried. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have built pipelines that can carry some of their oil out to the Red Sea, bypassing Hormuz. But notice that word, some, not most, not nearly all. The volume that flows through that strait every single day is so enormous that no realistic network of pipelines could ever replace it. You'd need a forest of them, costing untold billions, crossing borders and deserts and rival territories, taking years or decades to build. And they'd still fall short. And a pipeline has its own vulnerabilities. It's a long, exposed line that can be struck anywhere along its length. You don't escape the choke point problem. You just trade one soft spot for a longer, thinner one. All right then. Why not just keep the strait open by force? Park a great navy there permanently, escort the ships, and dare anyone to interfere. The world's strongest militaries are perfectly capable of dominating those waters in open battle. So why doesn't that solve it? Because, and here's the lesson that humbles every superpower that's ever tried. Winning the battle is not the same as keeping the strait open. You can rule the sky. You can sink every enemy warship. And none of it stops one man in a small boat from slipping out in the dark and dropping a single mine. None of it unspooks the insurance market. None of it convinces a frightened tanker captain that it's safe to sail his crew and his cargo through. You cannot bomb your way to confidence. You cannot force a choke point to feel safe. Safety is a feeling in the minds of thousands of civilian sailors and insurers, and no amount of firepower can simply install it there. This is one of the deepest truths about choke points, and about a lot of life besides. It is vastly easier to break something than to guarantee it. The side that wants the strait closed only has to create doubt. The side that wants it open has to manufacture certainty. And certainty is the single hardest thing in the world to manufacture. One side needs a single match. The other needs to convince everyone, everywhere, that there will be no fire. That is not a fair fight, and it never will be. Then there's the boldest fix of all, the one that comes up in war rooms every time this crisis flares. If the problem is the country sitting on the choke point, then remove the problem. Force a change. Take the territory. End the threat at its source. And this is where the mighty keep walking into the same trap, generation after generation. Because cornering or toppling the nation that controls a choke point doesn't make the danger smaller. Often it makes it far larger. Push a regime to the edge, and you don't make it reasonable. You make it desperate. And a desperate power with its hand on the doomsday lever is the single most dangerous thing in this entire equation, because the one restraint that kept the strait open, that it had something left to lose, is exactly the thing you've just stripped away. Try to seize the choke point, and you might find you've removed the only reason it was ever kept open in the first place. And if you go all the way, if you actually shatter the country sitting on that strait, you don't get a clean, quiet, well-behaved replacement. You get a vacuum. You get chaos spilling across borders, refugees, weapons scattering, instability radiating out into all the neighboring lands the world depends on. A failed state sitting astride the most important energy passage on Earth is a nightmare so large that even the country's worst enemies often quietly prefer the devil they know. Better a hostile government you can predict than no government at all, sitting on the valve to a fifth of the world's oil. So you end up boxed in on every side. You can't build around it. The volume's too vast. You can't force it open. Confidence can't be commanded. You can't remove the country sitting on it. That risks something worse. Every road out leads back to the same place. A narrow strait, a nation with its hand near the lever, and a world economy quietly praying that self-interest and self-restraint hold for one more day. This is the part that should stay with you. Some of the most important vulnerabilities in our world cannot be solved. They can only be managed, lived with, watched. There is no permanent fix for the Strait of Hormuz. just as there's no permanent fix for so many of the fragile threads our modern life hangs on. There is only the ongoing, uneasy, day-by-day work of keeping the worst from happening. And the unsettling truth is that the entire global economy, your gas, your groceries, your savings, quietly depends on that delicate management never, ever failing for too long. We don't fix it. We just keep getting lucky. And we call that luck stability. If you're still here with me, all the way down at this point, let me just stop and say thank you. Honestly. In a world engineered to grab your attention and yank it somewhere new every 15 seconds, the fact that you've stayed with something this layered and actually thought about it means more than you know. And if you're finding this valuable, if this is the kind of conversation you wish you got more of, do me one small favor. Take a second, subscribe to the channel, and come back and spend time with us. We do this every day, trying to make honest sense of how the world actually works underneath the noise. That's the whole reason this place exists. And I'll tell you what I've come to appreciate most about the people who watch a channel like this. You're not here to be told what to think. You've lived long enough, seen enough, to be suspicious of anyone who shows up with all the answers tied in a neat little bow. You want the machinery laid out honestly, so you can do your own thinking. That's rarer than it should be. So, welcome. You're in good company. Now let me show you why this whole story is about to get bigger than oil. Because here's the thing about choke points. We've spent this whole video talking about a waterway and the oil that flows through it. But the deeper idea, that the modern world balances on a few narrow, fragile threads, is spreading into places most people never think about. The map of our weak spots is growing. Take the strait we've been discussing. It isn't only oil anymore. Sitting right there in the Gulf region are some of the world's fastest growing hubs of something new. Data centers. The vast warehouses full of humming machines where the cloud actually lives. Where artificial intelligence runs. We talk about AI as if it floats somewhere abstract and untouchable, up in some imaginary sky. But it doesn't float anywhere. It sits in physical buildings, in specific places, drawing enormous amounts of power and water. And increasingly, some of those places are clustered in the very same volatile regions that sit on top of the old choke points. The cloud, it turns out, is just a warehouse. And warehouses can burn like anything else. We've quietly stacked the future of computing on top of the same geography that's been unstable for 50 years. And it goes further. Think about the cables. Almost all of the world's internet, the calls, the banking, the messages, this very video, doesn't travel by satellite the way people imagine. It travels through cables lying on the floor of the ocean, thin as a garden hose, carrying the digital life of entire continents. And many of those cables funnel through the same narrow maritime passages as the oil, the same choke points. So the exact geography that can squeeze the world's energy can increasingly squeeze its information too. We've built a second nervous system for the whole planet and run it through the same handful of soft spots. Then there's water itself. In much of the region we've been talking about, the drinking water doesn't come from rivers or rain. It comes from enormous plants that pull the salt out of seawater. Take out those plants, and a city of millions in the middle of a desert can be facing evacuation within a week. That's a choke point too, just a different kind. A single point of failure that an entire civilization quietly depends on and almost never thinks about. You see the pattern now, don't you? It's the same pattern, repeating in new forms. Energy, information, water, food. We keep building marvels of efficiency, and every one of them concentrates more of our survival into fewer and fewer critical points. We optimize, and optimize, and optimize, until the slack is all gone. And a system with no slack is a system with no margin for error. It runs beautifully right up until the day it doesn't. This is why understanding Hormuz matters so far beyond Hormuz. It's the clearest, oldest, most visible example of a kind of fragility that is quietly multiplying everywhere in modern life. Once you can see the shape of it here, the narrow passage, the cheap threat, the expensive defense, the global ripple, the impossibility of a clean fix, you start to see that same shape all over the map. In the cables, in the data centers, in the supply chains that ground to a halt the last time the world got a fright, in the handful of factories that make the one specialized chip the entire economy needs. We are, all of us, living inside an enormously powerful machine that we don't fully control and can't fully protect. And the strange comfort, if there is one, is simply this. Most days, it holds. The threads don't snap. The cornered don't pull the lever. The ships sail through, and we go about our lives, filling our tanks and buying our groceries, never once thinking about the 20-mile gap of water that made all of it possible. But you'll think about it now, and that changes how you read everything else. Let me bring you all the way back to where we began, to that thin sliver of sea, 20 miles wide, 2 narrow lanes of water you could cross in an afternoon. The stretch that quietly decides what you pay for gas, what your groceries cost, whether the whole world has a good year or a terrible one. We've traveled a long way together to understand one small place. And if there's a single thread running through all of it, it's this. The most powerful civilization in human history rests on foundations far more fragile than it ever wants to admit. We started by drawing the map, a great bathtub of oil with only one drain, and the whole world's energy forced to thread a single needle. We learned what a choke point really is, and why there are only a handful of them holding up everything we buy and sell. We saw the cruel arithmetic that lets a cheap threat hold an expensive world hostage. The rocks against the castle of gold. We went back 40 years to the tanker war and learned the pattern that repeats every time. The cornered power reaching for the choke point, the great powers dragged in against their will, the tragedies nobody intended, and that one fragile restraint, that the country with its hand on the lever still has something to lose. We followed the squeeze all the way from a faraway sea into your own kitchen. We faced the hard truth that there is no permanent fix, only careful day-by-day management of a danger that never truly goes away. And we saw the same shape of fragility spreading now into our data, our water, the very wiring of modern life. So here's what I want to leave in your hands. We tell ourselves a comforting story about the modern world, that it's too big to break, too advanced, too connected, too sophisticated to be brought down by anything as crude as a narrow channel and a handful of minds. We believe that all our connection has made us strong, safe, untouchable. But the truth is the reverse. All that connection didn't build us a fortress. It spun us a web, vast and beautiful, and humming with the activity of billions of lives. And a web, for all its intricate strength, has a property we'd rather not think about. Touch it in the right place, and the whole thing trembles. The Strait of Hormuz is simply the place where you can see the trembling most clearly, where the weightless, abstract, invincible-feeling global economy suddenly grows a body and a soft spot you can point to on a map. It's been threatened over and over across the decades, and every single time, the world holds its breath and relearns the same lesson it keeps trying so hard to forget. That all of this, everything we've built, quietly depends on the self-restraint of whoever happens to be cornered at that particular moment. That's a humbling thing to build a civilization on. And yet, here we are, still building on it, every single day. Filling our tanks, buying our bread, trusting without ever once thinking about it. That the ships will keep threading the needle, and the cornered will keep their hands off the lever, and the threads will hold for one more day. Most days they do. And we call that ordinary. We call it stability. We never once call it what it really is, which is luck, carefully managed by people we'll never meet in waters we'll never see. The next time you stand at the pump and watch the numbers climb, you'll understand something most people standing beside you never will. You'll know that the price isn't really about the gas station or even your own country. You'll know it traces back through a long, invisible chain to a stretch of water 20 miles wide on the far side of the earth, and to the oldest, quietest bargain holding the modern world together. And once you can see that, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. You'll see the same shape everywhere. In the cable on the ocean floor, in the warehouse full of machines, in the single road that everything you own traveled down to reach you. You'll move through the world a little more awake to how it actually works and how delicately it holds. That awareness is the whole point. That's what we're really after here. Not fear, awareness. The clear-eyed kind that lets you understand the headlines before they happen, instead of being startled by them after. So if this gave you something real to carry, something you'll actually think about the next time the news scrolls by, then do me one last favor. Share it with 5 people who'd want to see the world this clearly too. 5, because there's more than enough noise out there and nowhere near enough of this. Subscribe, follow along, and let's keep doing this together. And then leave me an honest comment, not just a thumbs up. Tell me which thread you think is the most fragile. The water, the cables, the chips, the choke points. And tell me which one you want me to pull on next. Because the world isn't slowing down, and there's always another quiet, invisible thing holding it all up. 20 miles of water. That's all it takes. Look closer. There's always more there than they want you to see.